Debating death and memory, past and present. It's an Archaeodeath debate.
Hello Archaeodeathlings, and welcome to my latest video exploring the archaeology of the Walking Dead. Now, in a previous video I gave you an introduction and I looked specifically at how, as an archaeologist, we can look at a fictional world of the post-apocalyptic context, a scenario of a zombie apocalypse, and look at the dead walking the earth, and we can actually reflect and use it as a way of thinking about the material culture of our world, our built environment, our landscape, its likely demise, and what comes afterwards. So in this presentation, I want to take forward the earlier idea I had of the first talk, which was very much looking at walls and walled communities as a theme that allows us to explore the fictional world of The Walking Dead and see synergies with our world and various fragments of imagined past from the prehistoric, ancient and medieval, colonial and frontier worlds that are drawn into creating what we think will happen in an apocalyptic future, the return to a sort of more primitive or more simple, more self-reliant culture. Now, in this video I promised to delve into my blog posts, my Archaeodeath blog posts, where I've done a whole series exploring the mortuary archaeology and how actually the TV show The Walking Dead has many clues and lessons for us as archaeologists, both in terms of ethical practice of how we treat the dead as practitioners, but also in looking at how what makes us human, perceived in the fictional world, is the way we treat the dead. Now, mortuary archaeology is about exploring the human past and mortality in the human past by excavating graves, cemeteries, studying funerary monuments, funerary architectures, funerary landscapes, and here is a selection of images of some of my research involving physical excavations of disturbing the dead in order to find out information about past societies' beliefs and practices about death, dying, and the dead, ancestors and so on, as well as some of the images of monuments that I've been involved in debating about that other people have excavated and found, such as the Viking warrior woman BJ581's chamber grave, discovered in the 19th century, and new DNA evidence by a team of Swedish researchers has suggested this is a female warrior. And so I've been part of the discussions about that. There's me and a colleague, Martin Rundqvist, being involved in excavating a Viking boat grave in Sweden in 2005, which I then subsequently published in the journal Medieval Archaeology. This is the Pillar of Elizeg, where I conducted fieldwork with colleagues from Bangor University. It's a Bronze Age burial mound with a early medieval cross shaft and set in its original base. This is the Smiling Abbot, a piece of early 14th century ephemeral grave slab that was recently rediscovered, and I researched and published on it. This is me excavating an early Anglo-Saxon skeleton when I was a student, and this is an artistic reconstruction by Katie Emery Ryers as part of a joint authored piece of work we did looking at the 4-post and 5-post structures found in early Anglo-Saxon cemeteries of the 5th and 6th centuries and suggesting how they may have been used as mortuary houses. So this is just a sort of a montage of images to remind you that part of my work as a professor of archaeology is investigating how past societies dealt with their dead. But another aspect is increasingly looking at how our popular culture can also be a focus of my interest. I can dig into our popular culture with an archaeologist's eye, or an archaeologist's perspective, focusing less on just the abstract ideas and the literary concepts, but on the storylines. So I want to ask, as a starting point, why would you dig into AMC's The Walking Dead, this hit TV show? Well, I think for the first point, this is such a popular genre, and this is the most popular version of a popular genre, that it allows us to reflect on death past by looking at the future of our funerary practices, how we would cope with dealing with the dead when our funerary industries, just alongside our electricity, our cars, our infrastructure of our society collapses. What would we do with the dead? And this is not only what would you do with those that have died, but those, how would we treat those that are no longer human but are still a threat to us? The catastrophe of the undead virus, where people are bitten, turn, and those that die of all causes, we find out, turn as well. So it's a way of envisaging the collapse and frontier societies that operate in a much more basic way and much more tangible engagement with mortality and the corporeality of the dead, but also it's another way of thinking about how societies past and present deal with concepts of the dead that are not fully gone, whether in ghostly form, in terms of revenants, physical. There are beliefs in many past societies about the dead that are not fully dead, that the dead haunt the living and can plague the living and can actually make the living ill. And so death pollution concepts are widespread and studied by anthropologists and sociologists, and this is a theme therefore that links into archaeological research. But in addition to that, archaeologists are also pursuing contemporary mortuary archaeology. We're exploring therefore not only an archaeologist can look at not only the distant past, at the ancient Egyptians, of the Iron Age cultures of Northern Europe, the Viking Age, but we can also look at ourselves. Not only are a lot of rescue and commercial excavations taking place on 18th, 19th century cemeteries, but looking even to the 20th and 21st centuries. And while we won't be disturbing graves, we are surveying and recording above ground funerary monuments, while we're not perhaps disturbing the actual funerary remains of such recent individuals. We are interested in our material cultures, our new landscapes and monuments of death and dying. And therefore, this is actually part of that because this is a product, the TV show is a product of our world and our imaginings about a fictional and a virtual world. And so it's part of an offshoot of contemporary mortuary archaeology. And there's a third area that reason. Not only is this because there are themes connecting past and present, that's what I started off talking about here. Not only are there connections to a broader study of us, the archaeology of us, but also this is a mechanism of engaging different audiences who may not otherwise be interested in the historical past in what mortuary archaeology does. Part of a broader movement of death positivity and an engagement with mortuary zombie culture and fictional culture, as Ruth Penfold Moss, a lecturer at the University of York, has argued. We can consider it a morbid space, not simply a space, a field of literary, fictional in imagination, but actually a physical space, because this is a landscape we're being shown, which the characters have to navigate and negotiate and deal with the dead. Now, of course, it all comes from comic books, and the Charlie Adlard and Robert Kirkman comic books have sort of driven the storyline, but the TV show is not beholden to every aspect of the storyline, and there's been adaptations and shifts in the story. And a lot of it is about graves, and the original comic books do feature graves as an integral part of the post-apocalyptic landscape. Not only do we see ruined buildings, warehouses, streets, and all the other paraphernalia of our world gone, but we also encounter the graves newly constructed for loved ones or less than loved ones. So here on the left here, this is Rick returning to the grave of Shane, his enemy / best buddy, and putting him down in no uncertain terms. And here, the Walking Dead in action, and Michonne and Sadiq and others facing against the undead. And there's also a real-world scenario here, because the filming of The Walking Dead has created its own tourist trail, its own death tourism in Georgia. And here's some news headlines of some of the frustrations linking local people with the sort of fallout or the industry that's surrounding these hit television programs and their various audiences. So this does actually affect our world, that the zombies are invading our world through heritage tourism. So there's a real world dimension there. And this is the other real world dimension I wanted to introduce, the synergy between our world and the fictional world. This was a controversial poster for the first season of the Walking Dead television series, What Makes Us Human? And this was run by, I think, the Daily Mail at Consett, County Durham, where a billboard right next to a cooperative funeral care home put that question with The Walking Dead April 2011 up right next to the co-op. And this is both amusing and disturbing and seen as a taste issue. But of course, the question that's drawing us in is not one of horror, but of what makes us human. And that's the very question that the TV show, like many of the zombie genre, is manifestations, is asking us. In crisis situations, but also in the time when the dead are animated but not fully cognizant, not fully driven by base impulses to feed. What makes us different from the Walking Dead? And the comic book was all about that the realization that the living are the Walking Dead. They are the ones waiting to die to become the Walking Dead, and they are not really existing. And how do they come back from that life, that post-apocalyptic life, to reforge civilizations afresh? And so I wanted to do a little study of the mortuary archaeology in The Walking Dead, and there's many different ways I've done this in my blog posts. I've talked about how there's sort of geeky little comedy allusions. There's been a popular t-shirts, which I used to have, but it wore out, of the March of Evolution, in which the zombie is the last manifestation, and here they sort of, to please the fans, or a fan pleasing sort of little stunt, when the group at the beginning of season 9 go back into a museum to retrieve old artifacts to rebuild their world. They encounter a walk of evolution, a very stinted one, and kill a zombie, and is with his arm slung over the skull of, I think, Homo erectus there, on the march of fossils upwards, and standing in an almost marching slump beyond Homo sapiens. And there's Gabriel, obviously a priest, makes a character that you either love or hate, I think. I'm not sure which I am. I think I do know. Well, I'm sure I won't go into that. But he sort of then goes, intelligent design, trying to suggest there's some of God's work in the zombie apocalypse. Whatever you think of that, you have this play, the consciousness of the TV show. They're aware of the fan culture, and some of the themes that they're bringing to the fore of what it means to be human and what's happening next with our society. And are the Walking Dead an aberration, or are they the next step into a post-living world where the undead rule the roost? So let's go on a quick journey through some of the mortuary archaeology of The Walking Dead. And in this video I won't go into any depth. But of course, Rick wakes up having been shot as a Georgia police officer, and realizes that wakes up from his coma and realizes that the things have gone wrong in the hospital. There's evidence of bodies everywhere, and the canteen is locked with "dead inside." Don't open, dead inside, written across the doors, and I would suggest that corpses, material culture, graves and landscapes are key to the dialogues between the living and the dead in the show. And we're shown a return to a past and a world that's on the frontier, where makeshift traditions and new mortuary landscapes are being constructed. And we can see that even from the makeshift communities of season 1 at Atlanta, where Rick Grimes comes out of his hospital, and we see an attempt to control the virus aborted. We see the body bags. We see the overrun hospital, unable to process the number of deaths and deal with those that are turning because of the virus, through to explorations of past mortuary landscapes, cemeteries, graves are encountered. Even the TV show opening credits have a overgrown cemetery for a time as part of the as part of the introduction. And of course the encountering of the graves of others, such as here at the farmstead, where Tyrese and Carol encounter and add to an existing cemetery. We encounter the choice of some just to be left behind, and to be left to be to turn and become one with the dead, so that he can walk and become one with his family, rather than actually being put down and dispatched. We encounter the digging of graves in the quarry near Atlanta, and the desire to create a funerary practice. But we also see and this follows the comic book, a sharp division perceived in the future, a moral division, an ontological division being created for the dead between those that are burned and those that are buried. That the zombies, the undead, the anonymous hordes can be dispatched and burnt almost as a makeshift sanitary process. A bit of gasoline and the corpses burn. Now, that's not how corpses burn, but that's how the fictional portrayal is. As opposed to loved ones, such as Andrea's sister, these are inhumed. These are given a cemetery. It may be a makeshift cemetery. There may be no funerary rituals, but there is that contrast. So here we see T-Dog and Glenn and Morales and Daryl leading the cremation of those undead that attack the camp versus the loved ones that are disposed of. And that theme of dividing the dead by disposal method, by transformation by fire for the unloved, the unknown, the unnamed, versus the inhumation following the comic books we find in season 2 at the farm, where we see Herschel's farm, and we see members of the community who are known and named given burials, inhumation burials, whereas around the back it's clearly intended to be the sort of backside, the sort of away from the farm building. We see Shane and T-Dog and Andrea, particular characters, particular tough guy characters, or particular labour intensive characters, physical characters, trying to create a makeshift cremation pyre. Now, I don't think this is a particularly effective attempt to show a cremation pyre, but that's not really the point, is it? It's about how the show is trying to show that differentiation between the known dead, the named dead, the loved one, and the unnamed, unknown dead. So in season 3, with the correctional facility, they finally find a base that they can hold up. We see the graves as inhumation graves of loved ones as a point of not only respect for the dead, but also a quasi-spiritual dialogue with the dead. So Laurie's grave, whether we're left questioning whether Rick is delusional or it's simply a visual way of him, showing his mourning, his loss for his wife. But he sort of encounters her at the graveside. That individual objects increasingly become focuses of placement at individual graves. And in contrast, in one episode, Rick goes off to find his old friend Morgan Jones and their son, and Dwayne is gone, and Morgan is alone and seems to be lost in a world of the undead. And he is cremating the dead. We show him makeshift cremating. We also shown the governor, the bad guy of Woodbury. He has no respect for the dead and is happy to treat them, the undead, with disrespect. The road to Terminus, we see the correctional facility having a growing cemetery as virus hits the community, and individual items, in this case a gun and the spectacles of the boy who succumbs to the virus, sort of are markers of mnemonics for the community to remember them by. Meanwhile, Herschel and Michonne cremate the undead who attack the correctional facility. So the cremation, and there's a spatial dimension to this as well, that cremation is taking place outside of the correctional facility, whereas the cemetery is part of the community. It's within the defended walls. It's part of, and this reflects the comic books too. We do see clandestine cremation, attempts to burn we do find out who did this, but to kill people who are dying of the virus, and this is a focus of tension. The burning of the bodies with gasoline as a crude attempt to eradicate the potential viral threat. So negative cremation for the loved ones, but in dire circumstances, and respectful burial. Inhumation is seen as the American way, the frontier way that is returned to at the post-zombie apocalypse. Now, we do encounter other communities, bad communities, that have other memorial practices, and there's a whole discussion could be made of the terminus community and their mobilization of their own dead to justify their cannibalism, mourning as legitimization, and the sort of processing of bodies as almost like a horrible concentration camp type method where they completely strip people of any humanity. And again, caring for the living and caring for the dead is shown as pivotal to what makes us human, as opposed to those that are the bad guys. We have encounters with those who die along the road. One of my favourite characters dies, and his beanie hat is put on his grave. We see characters dealing with death and lying with the dead in the pits outside the settlement where the zombies are disposed of. In this case, not cremated, and we see communities that discard the dead as bad communities. So the well shaft at the Grady Memorial Hospital, where they just discard those that aren't wanted, whereas those who dispatch the undead in a caring way, such as the child and mother at the shelter in Atlanta, shows the humanity surviving. And there's my blog deals with other examples of that in seasons 5 and 6. And when we get to Alexandria, we finally get to communities. We see on the way Morgan Jones on his journey to Alexandria. He encounters Eastman in the fantastic episode Here Is Not Here, where Eastman is living alone, but when he meets a zombie or meets an undead character and kills them, he tries to find out their name, buries them with respect, and puts their name on a gravestone so they at least get. And again, his treatment of the dead defines his humanity. And Morgan learns from this and takes forward that, trying not to kill when he can, apart from when he finally cracks, and also trying to dispose of the dead in a respectful fashion. And the community of Alexandria has its own evolving funerary culture in a carefully shielded corner within the walled community where the graves of loved ones are inhumed. They also have a memorial wall. They use the wall of their community to, from an inside perspective, to name those that are lost and have yet to come back. Although the former leader of the community is disposed of in the woods in an interesting funerary ritual away from the community, where she was found wandering as an undead person. So that's a departure. But throughout, cremation is seen as negative, and we see an interesting dynamic take on when Hilltop is arrived at, when they arrive at the very restricted small community of Hilltop, who decide to dispose of the dead by cremation. And we're left in a tension here about cremation, because this is almost a positive show of cremation, but it's also perhaps a sign of disrespect. The governor cremates people just to keep them out of sight. We get a sense that cremation is used for the unnamed hordes of the dead, but here it's loved ones who are remembered in memory, as Jesus explains, but not in grave form. But that changes with the addition of the graves of some of the heroes, whose graves become focuses of resistance and change the funerary practices, so that this is the Alexandria cemetery, where the graves become a focus of deception, claiming the widower is dead, that Maggie is dead, but also the graves of Abraham and Glenn, which become the focus of a new burial tradition at Hilltop. Meanwhile, the bad guys, the saviours, use the dead as the governor had used the dead as a weapon. He uses them as guards on his fences, piercing them and displaying them to defend his enclosure. And I won't give away too many spoilers through the later series, but it's important to mention that again and again, after conflict, the cemeteries of Alexandria and the Hilltop grow and continue to define loved ones versus the unloved ones, the good from the bad. And as the cemetery at Hilltop grows through season 8, we see the physical manifestation of the losses accrued through their conflict, but we also see the differentiation. So the captured saviours are not allowed to be buried in that cemetery. They're forced to dig their own graves outside the Hilltop community in a more cursory fashion. And into season 9, we have a time jump, and we see that those graves of Alexandria have turned back to nature with only small material culture tokens, ornaments, boots, stone piles, caps, used to mark individual graves. I won't. There's more interesting things about season 10, but I haven't blogged about that, so you have to come back to me with that for that one. But the key implications are interesting. So we've charted the mortuary landscape of The Walking Dead in very brief terms, and I've tried to point out how spatially and materially, the corporeally, the loved ones are differentiated from the undead, but there's nuances, shifts, and variations between communities. But this clear differentiation between the bad guys don't care about the living, but they also don't care about the dead, and they're happy to abuse the dead and use the dead. They don't care about their humanity, whereas the good guys will drape clothes over the undead that they've dispatched in the golf club when Daryl and meet these people who are hanging and in being left and humiliated, and we see that again and again. That respect for the dead and the undead defines you as being human, even if it's cursory. But within that, there's that division between the ontological and spatial and moral and social and corporeal, burning of the dead for the unloved, tending to be versus inhumation as seen as held on high on a sort of pedestal. And this really harks back to a colonial frontier landscape. So defining and dealing with the dead matters at the zombie apocalypse, we're told, in this fictional world, and I think that reveals a lot about us and our tensions and anxieties around death. We know the dead matter, but we're still not sure precisely what we do with them. And our tensions around cremation, maybe. Now that America, as well as Europe, is largely cremating, we're still not sure about cremation. We still have anxieties and concerns about it. In death, we differentiate us from others, the named and the loved from the walkers and the others. The us from them's the walkers and others. Surviving the apocalypse is about staying alive, but also staying human and staying moral and staying concerned with the dead. And cemeteries, modes of disposal, memorials and material cultures constitute a landscape of the dead. And it's very much a return to an American frontier mentality. So I hope you've enjoyed that little summary, quite rapid, I know, of some of my thinking. I'm writing this up now as a research paper. I've actually got one paper coming out. I've got another research paper that's going to be out perhaps next year, late next year, on aspects of this. But it's all recorded. If it can't be plagiarized because it's said here first, and I've already presented it twice at academic conferences. So these are my ideas. Anyone else working on it is welcome to cite me and cite this video. But if you nick my ideas, I'll know about it. But I'm putting these ideas out there because I want to share information. I want to share ideas. Not that I've got all the answers, and I'm not trying to pass judgment on TV shows. And I think there's a lot of snobbery amongst academics. They're happy to comment on highbrow fiction, but they won't deal with the very TV shows that are being explored by vast numbers of people, being seen by millions of people, and yet contain not only insights into how we think about death and the dead, but also are important mechanisms by which we can think and critically engage people with issues of mortality and material culture and landscape. And that's what we're surely about as archaeologists. We want to create conversations that connect our research into the past with people today. And that's what real good research is all about. It's not simply about stuff we found out about the past, but why this matters and what stories does it tell about us, and how does this link into the kind of stories that are being told in our fiction.
Sadly, we're all going to die. But while you're waiting, why not follow Archaeodeath? Subscribe now on YouTube.